I love romance novels. I'm not going to lie, I love romance novels. And more than loving romance novels, I respect romance novels. And one of the things that grinds my gears more than anything else is the fact that romance novels are so derided. People look down on them so much. Because I can honestly say, and I'm going to make this argument in this video, the romance novels are probably one of the best forms of art that exist today. Stay tuned. Hey guys, it is me, and I'm here to make a video that's a bit of a rant. It's about romance novels. Oh, romance novels. It's funny. A few years ago, they had some big scandal in the world of romance publishing. It was called #Cockygate. That was it. And it was all about a romance author. I can't even remember her name. And she tried to trademark the word cocky in book titles because she had a series of romance books called, I don't know, Cocky Cowboy, Cocky Gambler, Cocky whatever. And she tried to copyright that, and she sent cease and desist letters to authors who had written books that had cocky in the title, even if they predated her cocky books. And it caused a huge uproar, and it was one of the few times people actually spoke about romance novels and writing in a public forum, and like the New York Daily Post, because this woman behind Cockygate lived in New York. They wrote about it, and it was all so salacious and weird. It was making fun of romance writers and making fun of romance books, and I read it, and I was really disappointed. I was like, wow, people who write this shit don't read romance books. They don't understand what romance books are. And this mindset continued. I was talking a few years ago to somebody I just met, who I'm now pretty good friends with, and I respect immensely. And we were talking books, and she found out that I was a writer, and I was like, oh yeah, I've written 29 full-length books. And she was like, 29 books? That's amazing. And I was like, and then she was like, oh, I suppose they're only romance books. And I was like, because that's the thing. Romance books are books. Romance books are books. And books are books. And I think there's this weird thing, this weird, like, contradictory cognitive dissonance when it comes to books and writing and genre, which we need to talk about, because we don't talk about it. There's this idea that some books have more merit than other books based purely on what type of books they are. Let me give you an example, okay? This book here. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Love in the Time of Cholera, a great piece of literary fiction. Many people rave about this book. I've actually read it myself. I read it because I was arguing about how bad it was, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty interesting read. And then let me show you another book. Lover or Loser by Tessa Bailey. Who is Tessa Bailey? Tessa Bailey is a New York Times and US Today best-selling author. You get these two books together. And if you approached a random person in the street and said, which book has more merit? And they'd be like, oh, this book, look at this sacred book. And this book, you know, the merit here is that it is a very popular, well-received book with lots of reviews that sold lots of copies, just like all of Tessa Bailey's books, because she is a master craftswoman. But I find it so weird that people have their opinions about books, which book is more meritorious than another book. And the remarkable thing is, if I went into a street anywhere in the English-speaking world and said, which book has more merit, then even if they hadn't read either of the books, people will probably say this book, because it is literature. Literature. But what is literature? Literally, what is literature? Literature is nothing. Literature is just the written word. But it's this weird conceit we have as human beings, as writers in the publishing industry. Like all of the sins of publishing, it is a legacy of traditional publishing, where when you become a writer, they ask you, it's almost like signing a deal with the devil. Do you want to be a genre author or a literary author? And if you're a literary author, then you may be taken seriously. Yes, people will write reviews about your book should be taken seriously. If you're a genre author, then you're sold out. because you're writing stuff people want to read. Oh, well, I mean, okay, you might be able to make a living from writing this stuff, which you definitely can't from writing literary fiction, but you've sold out, you've somehow compromised. And how? What is different between this book and this book? What is different between this book and this book? And I imagine most people watching this video, all three of you, would have a tough time putting that together because you might not have read either of them. And if you have read this one, because people who, and that's interesting, if you have read this one, you probably have an opinion. And if you have read this one, you might even have the same opinion. But I will sit there and argue that this book, Lover or Loser, has as much literary merit as this book. Perhaps even more. Because this is the thing, people deride romance as a genre, as a category, as a form of art. And they deride it without having any idea about what it is, what the romance genre is, what writing a romance book entails. And it's such a weird conceit, because it's like the emperor's new clothes. How can you say that romance books are somehow have less literary merit when they are the books people read? Like, already in traditional publishing, romance is the biggest piece of the pie, and then self-publishing has exploded. And Amazon don't really release the public figures for what goes on behind the scenes. But let me just tell you that 70%, upwards of 70% of all books sold are romance books, which is amazing when you think about it. And just by sheer weight of numbers alone, you might argue that romance has some of the most talented writers in the world writing for it, just from sheer numbers alone. And there is an awful lot of crap that is published as romance. There's an awful lot of not that great stuff published as romance, but there are some terrific, fantastic, beautifully written, meaningful, deep and impactful books that are written that critics and other people deride and ignore because they are romance, when in fact, through sheer weight of numbers alone, I would argue probably the best writers alive today are probably writing in romance right now. Maybe you'd argue that Tessa Bailey is one of them. I mean, she is an incredibly accomplished, very, very, very capable craftswoman. And she crafts brilliant stories. And they're brilliant for all sorts of different reasons to what we think of as like literature. I mean, just take a look at this book. Lover or Loser. I saw this book, my wife actually bought this for me, because she always knows I like to pick up the new romance books, and my wife is addicted to watching HGTV. It's on all the time in the house. We have Love It or Lose It, that show where you've got, I need to do a video about her sometimes, that brilliant woman, I can't remember her name, and the guy, and one of them's trying to get the couple to sell the house, and she's trying to renovate the house and make them stay there. But it's a great show. It's a moment in time, it's a zeitgeist, it's a thing. Love it or list it. If you get it, you get it. And that's like romance. So Love Her or Lose Her. Like for my wife, that was like concept, immediately sold it to her. I saw it, concept, immediately sold it to her. Just the concept of this book alone is a work of art. Because Tessa Bailey is immediately speaking to her audience directly. She knows who she's speaking to, and it resonates with them, because it resonated with my wife and it resonated with me, and we bought this book without even hesitating it, because she spoke our language. And that is huge. Like, I don't think people appreciate just what that means, to be able to reach out and speak somebody's language as an artist. And said, this book is a great book and has all sorts of awesome, interesting things to talk about, and like, it is an important book. But, you know, Love in the Time of Cholera, why do people read this book? Let's talk about this. Why do people read this book? I read this book because I had read it at one time in university or something like that, and then my wife and a friend of ours were watching How I Met Your Mother, and one of the characters was like, oh, my favourite book is Love in the Time of Cholera. And believe me, if I ever meet somebody who says, oh, my favourite book is Love at the Time in the Cholera, I'll be like, you are a pretentious wanker. And I literally bought a copy of this book to reread it, just to justify in my head that yes, people who believed that, they were a bunch of wankers, pretentious wankers. And I read it, and it was infuriatingly good as a book. So I had to get off my high horse a bit. But that's why I read it. I read it because it was a book that other people had read, and I believe that you shouldn't have an opinion about a book unless you have read it in recent memory. But that's how literature exists. Literary fiction and literature exists because it has this what could you call it? This aura of like respectability about it. And you don't generally read books like this because they grab your attention. You want to. You generally read books like this because they're seen as worthy. People don't read literary fiction except in the context of other people who have read literary fiction. It's this interminable echo chamber of self-validation. It's like, I read this book because I wanted to have an opinion about it, to talk to with somebody else who read that book, and both of us had decided to read this book because this book had been read and talked about by intellectuals and important people, and therefore we wanted to consider ourselves intellectuals and important people, and therefore we read the book. And it's this, as I said, weird echo chamber thing. It is, excuse my French, what one might call a circle jerk, a pretentious circle jerk. And I certainly enjoy this kind of thing. I really enjoyed reading this book again and then talking to other people who read this book and having a discussion about it and stuff like that. But a book like this, you read for a different reason. You read because it's enjoyable. And because you see it, and it's interesting to you because of the concept of it. The concept resonates with you. And that's the thing that Tessa Bailey does so well, especially with this book. She's got another one, Fix Her Up. I think there are a bunch of them. But she has this power just with the concept of the book, of drilling into your brain and saying, I speak the same language as you, and then you read it. And reading romance novels, this is the thing. Again, people deride romance novels. When I was reading all those New York Post articles about romance novels, they were making jokes about them being so steamy and stuff like that. But romance novels are good, and they have to be good. Not all romance novels are good. I mean, I would say just as there are probably a disproportionately high number of brilliant writers writing romance right now, there are definitely a disproportionate number of terrible writers and people who are just trying to make a quick buck in a romance genre. But I do say that good romance writers are brilliant at what they do, and I'll tell you why that is. And that's because when your traditional publisher is like, you have to make a choice between being a literary fiction author or a genre fiction author, and people somehow think that literary fiction has more literary merit than genre fiction, when I would argue the exact opposite. Ugh. And I'll tell you why. Because literary fiction has very little rules. People write literature and they do experimental things and they do interesting things and they write about people and situations that are very interesting. And normally you get a lot out of reading books that are considered good in literary fiction. But when it comes to writing romance, it is a much more complex creature. Romance especially. All genre fiction has a sort of poetry to it. Like thrillers especially. I always talk about Dan Harmon's 8-point story circle, and I use his story circle to plot my stories. And the difference between genre fiction, like, I don't know, Dan Brown, Tom Clancy, Clive Cussler, Lee Child, perfect, is that they all write stories to a traditionally established flow of a story. And literary fiction authors don't need to do that. They are allowed to experiment. They're allowed to go off. You could write a romance novel with a sad ending, and that would be literature. Whereas if you wrote a romance novel with a sad ending and tried to sell it as a romance novel, people would be like, that's not a romance novel. A romance novel needs a happily ever after. And you bet your bottom dollar it does. Genre fiction, and especially romance, cater to people who expect what they read to have a certain familiar cadence to it. And that familiar cadence is not something that people should look down upon. The familiar cadence of telling an effective story has existed in humanity since we used to tell stories around the campfire as cavemen. The whole idea of a story that goes round into a circle, that is as intrinsic to the human experience as speech. And genre fiction respects that. And genre fiction, the stories are told in the context of that, and that means they are superior books. Literary fiction gives you the freedom to write outside of what it is people expect from a story. But the reason literary fiction is traditionally never a very profitable genre to write in, or category to write in, is because when you write stories following the conventions that lead to a satisfactory conclusion, you leave your readers more satisfied, and then they come back. Lover or Loser, Fixer Up, all good genre fiction is like a three-course meal, and you expect what to get, and it comes in order, and at the end of it you sit there and you feel satisfied, and hopefully the book has had a twist to this stuff. Maybe it's a little bit of something that made you think, something that was different to the ones that came before it, but at the end of the day it is always that structure. That structure is as intrinsic to the human storytelling experience as it is possible to get. And when you write genre fiction, and you write your story so it fits within these things, it is like long form poetry. And out of all of that, romance novels are the cream of the crop, because I talk about Dan Harmon's sort of story circle as a good way to tell stories. Romance novels, romance stories, are told a slightly different way. The beats are different. It's the same structure, and structure is everything. You cannot have a successful romance novel without that structure. But whereas Dan Harmon's story circle is generally all about, how to plot events that happen to someone, romance books use a very structured story, all focused around emotion. Not events, but emotions. It's all about two people who come together, and there is something about the other person's compelling, yet at the same time there is something internal about the hero and the heroine, where they're like resistant to their attraction to this person. And then there's a section in the story where they come closer together and feel their attraction, and they dip their toe into, maybe, there could be something here, and it falls apart when they both have to confront their own inner problems, and then they get brought together again, and then there's a much bigger dramatic breakup in which normally the hero, I try and write it, the hero and the heroine have to make a sacrifice and make a call and say whether they are willing to give something up to be with this person. And in some ways it's beautiful, but the thing that is most beautiful about it, it is all powered by emotion. I know that video I made the other day, I was talking about how emotion is the most powerful tool a storyteller has. It's the most essential part. It is what stories are. Stories are moving somebody from one emotional place to another emotional place. And romance novels focus on that. It is like long form poetry. And I say it's like long form poetry because if you write a sonnet, or if you write a haiku, or if you write a limerick, there's a formula to how you write one of these things. So many syllables, so many lines. Like a haiku is like 7 syllables, 5 syllables, 7 syllables. A sonnet, 10 syllables, 10 syllables, 10 syllables. Even when you write any poem that rhymes, it's like, do you have the first 2 lines rhyme? Do you have the first line, then the third line rhyme? There is always a convention and a structure. It's like music as well. Music is really enjoyable because it can be it needs to be predictable. You need to start off on a piece of music and know what's coming next, but then if they add a little twist to it, like playing with a flat note rather than the regular note, then it adds a little spice to it. But you need to have that structure to it. And romance is just so effective because to be a successful romance author, you need to learn and be loyal to that structure of romance storytelling, which is all about emotion. And if you are able to reach into a reader's heart and grab them and make them feel emotion and then pull them on this incredibly satisfying journey, that's something powerful. And people don't realize that. People don't respect that about romance books. And I will say there is a lot of trite and crap published in romance, but I'd say there's a lot of trite and crap published in literary fiction as well. But a good romance novel, a really good romance novel, is is something beautiful. And I've read so many of them over the years, and I've always been really, really impressed at what they can do. And so, yeah, I understand the whole idea of people looking down on romance, but the romance novels are going to be the hill I die on, because I truly believe there is the potential for perhaps the greatest of all writing to exist in the framework of romance novels. I am incredibly respectful of how authors know what it is their readers want and expect and give it to them. I'm really, really impressed with authors who succeed at what I try to do, which is tell the stories I want to tell through the framework of a romance novel. And if you can do that, then the world is yours. If you get to tell the stories that you want to tell, and you have the craftsmanship to do it in the format of a romance story, and you're good enough that people buy it and read it and are engaged by it and like it, and you have a successful romance book, then that, to me, you should go to bed satisfied with that. Because it takes a lot of hard work and humility and self-improvement and self-awareness to be able to learn how to write a really good romance book. And I mean, writing in general, as Hemingway said, we are all apprentices in a craft to which no one becomes a master. But to learn to craft really good romance books that make people feel things is a beautiful and magical thing. And I think it deserves a lot more respect than it gets. And there are lots of romance authors who I've read the books of, and some of them I've spoken to, who I have nothing but incredible respect for as people and as artists. So I'll tell you what, don't dismiss romance books, because yeah, I truly believe the best writers alive today are probably writing in romance right now. And by dismissing romance books, by not appreciating them or not being open-minded to understanding what they are, you're basically identifying yourself as somebody who doesn't want to really get outside of their comfort zone and learn what good writing is all about. Anyway, I sound awfully pretentious when I say that. But I don't know. Being successful in writing romance changed my life for so many different reasons. It really helped me develop a lot more empathy and compassion for people. It really made me respect the hard work that so many other authors do, and so many authors who came before us do. But I think more than that, it makes me feel alive. Writing romance, yeah, romance is always about emotions. And I'm not very good with emotions. I'm a very guarded person. And for me, writing has always been a way to express myself in a way that I don't face to face very often. And romance especially, because it demands making the reader feel emotion. It's powerful. It's powerful to read, and it's really powerful to write. It's like therapy for me. So yeah, don't disrespect romance, and don't disrespect romance authors. And hey look, just good old Long Island girl. I married one of those. Check out Tessa Bailey's books. I have no affiliation with Tessa Bailey. I don't think I've ever interacted with her, but she's great. She's one of the master craftswomen. Thanks very much. I will speak to you again soon. Ciao. I'm Roland Hulme. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got a link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.